So the way the dictionary defines a strawman fallacy is that it is when someone argues against a distorted version of their opponent's position rather than the original argument. Now, given the informal nature of the Dead Domain video, of Jordan's video, this is why I elected to say that Jordan was attacking windmills. The metaphor for attacking windmills is drawn from the story of Don Quixote, a man who would believe himself a chivalrous knight fighting monsters. There is, of course, a famous story about Don Quixote where the man fights windmills, which he also believes are giants. But unfortunately for him, one of the buildings ends up knocking him off his horse. Now, this is why the metaphor attacking the windmills is appropriate. Jordan sees himself as a giant slayer when, in reality, his advances on synthetic man are just a means of getting knocked off his horse, even as he attempts to joust a windmill. The way this works is Jordan will point to something Kobe is doing. Look there, there's a giant. Objectively, however, anyone else would see a windmill where Jordan sees a giant. So to better understand what is going on throughout this 2.5-hour runtime of a video, that is exactly the metaphor that needs to be at the forefront of your mind. And that is also why covering it in any amount of detail relative to its runtime is an idiotic endeavor. Now, something a friend of mine brought to my concern and something I want to address here is about Jordan's alleging that harassment occurs to people online simply because they exist. I don't want to give myself to the appearance that I'm denying harassment does indeed occur on the internet. And another angle by which I could have approached this topic was to note that Jordan does not even define what harassment is, nor does Jordan give any specific examples that would otherwise tie Kobe to said instances of harassment. Instead, what I chose to do was to cut past all that and say that Jordan's generalization doesn't mean anything one way or another. Ultimately, what it all really amounts to is Jordan was being sneaky with language and trying to indirectly align the Synthetic Man channel with a negative term, harassment. And what are you supposed to do when you hear that word? Well, you're not supposed to think about it, Redditor. You're just supposed to let your programming take over. Just don't think about it. But as far as I'm concerned, if Jordan really believes that Kobe is indeed harassing people on the internet, well, then why not just come out and say it? But no, Jordan is a coward and uses language of association so as not to tie oneself to anything one says. Another reason why I won't cover the entirety of Jordan's video in piecemeal is that most of my coverage of Jordan's video would be me repeating the phrase unearned association. For instance,
now, if you're a fan of Synthetic Man or even just the right-wing Gamergate crowd...
Okay, here I would say unearned association with the term right-wing Gamergate crowd.
Or even just hate lefty SJW snowflakes like me.
And here I would say there is an unearned association with hatred of left SJW snowflake crowd.
And for new viewers to the channel, I hear you ask, why?
And here I would say unearned streamlining of what your opinion should be or shouldn't be after watching Jordan's video. Unearned, unearned, unearned. In the future, if you ever come across an NPC like Jordan, realize such people just grant themselves viewpoints they have not earned, and they will continually do so. Don't fall for it. More on attacking the windmills. Much of what Jordan does throughout his video is slant a narrative. Jordan projects a question that he intends on leading toward a prescribed conclusion. That's why I definitively pointed to his narrative as bad faith. You see, you're not exactly unburdening yourself of any proofs if you just formulate your own questions to answer. And I would venture to say that Jordan prefers his video games on easy mode or on story mode. Jordan's video postulates Kobe as being an archetype of young white men.
It's because Synth and how he's become more radical and hateful are representative of a growing amount of predominantly young men in online spaces.
Now, archetypes are useful for folks like Jordan insofar as their counter-narratives just write themselves. In other words, you need no longer think about what you're doing. Jordan can just let his NPC brain fill in all the gaps, including freely applying the isms to Synthetic Man without much thought. This is Reddit tier thought processes. And when I say this is Reddit tier thinking, what I mean will require a bit of a short dive here. For anyone with a peripheral understanding of how Reddit works, one will naturally assume Reddit is a website for discussions like any other forum is. Digging deeper, however, there is an active culture on Reddit that does encourage and reward groupthink. Now, groupthink is encouraged on Reddit thanks to censorship, in addition to comments receiving bumps through karma, or a karma system. The more karma a comment receives, the more people believe said comment is the correct take on any given subject matter, no matter what the comment is. Reddit is also an interesting case study for the effect that censorship has on the ability to think about anything in a critical manner. Now, the real case against censorship is that censorship narrows the range of thought. It removes words necessary for the means of expression. Now, of course, some folks will try to work around said censorship, but often that leads to the failure to express one's own opinions as they are. Instead, what ends up happening is that users involuntarily self-indoctrinate, even as they try to reorient their brains to various speech limitations. The intent is to make the language of the individual sound like it is moronic in comparison to the language of groupthink. Groupthink which is largely controlled and guided by the leftist progressive state. That's why NPC bugmen like Jordan adopt the lingo and throw out generally approved terms and phrases that remain uncensored for the purposes of creating an antithesis to the progressive state. Hence why Jordan freely calls synthetic man the isms, because Jordan's commentary necessarily relies on an audience who are incapable of thinking beyond their Redditor brains. And now, originally, this is why the phrase touch grass was so appropriate. In essence, touch grass was encouraging users to lean outside the censored confines of an online space and to think about things from new perspectives. And unfortunately, that term has also been co-opted. One final aspect worth remarking on is the parasocial aspect to all of this. Let me preface this by addressing Kobe's predilection for futanari.
You see, for almost every point he makes, he himself will say something that either disproves it or shows that he takes part in something he condemns others for. For example, he loves decrying degeneracy and openly insulting trans people and anyone who's not a straight white man, really. Yet, he sure does seem to engage in degeneracy of his own.
Bro, I don't even know. It definitely is some kind of weird psychological damage. Because it's like, it weirdly also combines with my strange fascination with eugenics. Because the idea of Fuda is some kind of like alternative Ubermensch being also like sort of ties into the fetish.
Now, every time this subject matter has come up, Kobe has very appropriately addressed it in two different manners. The first is comedy.
It's a butt. God damn it. Yeah, whatever. It's a butt plug for new Abby to shove her giant Fuda cock in my ass. There you go, I said it.
Because, yes, futanari is ridiculous. Futanari isn't real, and it only exists as an ideal within the 2D realm. And of course, Kobe has acknowledged this, and when he does laugh at it, there's absolutely no fault to find in his doing so. Said laughter is out of the sheer state of the fetish being ridiculous, as most fetishes are. But the second manner of addressing it is seriousness. Kobe talks about his fetish sometimes from a standpoint of looking at it realistically.
The best traits of women while also having like a penis and usually also a vagina. I don't know, man. It doesn't have to make sense because it's not real.
And when he does not try to justify it nor advocate for why it is a good thing. The opposite, in fact.
You guys gotta stop jerking off to porn. I'm a living example. My head only is filled with disgusting shit. My experience with seeing women's cruelty what made me food a pilt. Bro, I don't even know. It definitely is some kind of weird psychological damage.
The way that he talks about his fetish, he fully accepts it as part of a state of degeneracy, something that affects him in a severely negative way. So, make no bones about it, this manner of addressing degeneracy is commendable on his part. He remarks on it in a way that is mature and appropriate. And on that note, I don't believe his chat fully appreciates that. I don't think they appreciate his willingness to talk about this in the manner by which he does, because Kobe in no way advocates for his fetish, nor does he see it as something that should be accepted as normal. So we go back to Dead Domain. For someone of Jordan's stock, one must necessarily perceive degeneracy as normalcy. And so Jordan's reaction here is to advocate for said degeneracy and to even lean into it in a parasocial manner.
Because of what he cites to be a porn addiction, Synth apparently does find trans people attractive.
And yes, indeed, Jordan implies that there's a sexual attraction he has toward Kobe, which is all kinds of weird and is exactly why Kobe is not an advocate for parasocial behavior. That would also be a good explanation as to why the waifu person in his chat who flirted with him is someone he also denied. He knows full well such behavior is unhealthy and unrealistic. Jordan, on the other hand, wants to conflate futanari with transgenderism. He doesn't realize there's a difference between a fantasy and reality. This is completely overlooking the fact that Kobe has fully acknowledged that his fetish is a fantasy.
Again, like, food is something that really only works in anime. There's many fetishes that only work in anime.
It is strictly relegated to the 2D world, in which any and all fantasies are possible, which naturally means his fetish is impossible to achieve in the realm of reality. That's the point of his even talking about his fetish in the first place. Part of Kobe's state of unhappiness and misery is partially due to the fact that at some point in time he must have been exposed to things that messed up his sexual compass.
Bro, I don't even know. It definitely is some kind of weird psychological damage.
A facet that is all too common for people who frequent digital space. Now, if you've ever taken part of an AA meeting, you'll know one of the first things they teach you is to openly acknowledge that you have a problem. And so Kobe, to some of the only ears who would openly listen to him talk, has openly acknowledged that he has a problem. And to anyone who would judge him for that, my response would be that for anyone who is without sin, cast the first stone.